So stars with more metals in them actually appear redder than those with less. So less metals in a star and it will appear bluer. Now, what do we mean by metals when we talk about stars? Well, actually, it's not in the sense that you normally think of a metal. It refers to anything that is heavier than hydrogen or helium. So it's an element that is heavier than hydrogen or helium. We would refer to a metal in astrophysics, in astronomy, and we call it metallicity. So the metallicity of an object is how many metals are in that in comparison to the hydrogen and helium. So those heavier elements in the star are going to be created in the cores of stars and during supernovas. So they're predominantly hydrogen and helium, and in the early universe there wouldn't have been many heavier elements, and these are normally formed in the center of the stars during the evolution, and as they age they make more and more, and then at the end of the life as well when you have the supernova. So there are a few different populations of stars. Your low metallicity population 2 stars, are older generation ones. These would have formed earlier in the universe when there was less heavy elements around. So these would be quite low metallicity. They wouldn't have many metals in them. And as they go through their cycle, they end their lives, they would then give rise to the next generation. And that next generation that forms in the remnants of the first one would already have a head start on the amount of heavy elements that they have. So they would typically have a higher metal content, these population 1 stars. So it happens that over these generations, you get more and more being produced and they end up in the stars. So if we just go back to stars, 2 stars that have the same age and of the same mass, but one is low metallicity, one is high metallicity. The low one with low metals in them, or not very many metals in comparison to the second one, is going to appear slightly bluer than one that has a higher content of metals in. So although I've shown here a blue and a reddish one, they're not going to be that different. It's just going to be a slight colour change, so it'll be slightly bluer, not necessarily that it would be blue. Now, what that means on the HR diagram is they sit slightly to the left. So the HR diagram is this diagram of stars where you have the luminosity plotted against the surface temperature, and the diagonal down the centre is the main sequence. So the more massive a star, the higher the surface temperature and the more luminous it is. And main sequence stars will sit somewhere along there depending on their mass, really. But a low metallicity star, in comparison to an equivalent high metallicity one, is going to sit slightly to the left of that, because it's going to be slightly bluer, which means it sits slightly to the left that way. So it's kind of just on the side compared to a higher metallicity star, which would be further to the right. So what's actually causing this? Well, the first thing is something called line blanketing. And this is where you've got lots of absorption lines from heavy elements in the spectrum of the star that are absorbing that part of the spectrum. So for example, most of it is going to be iron. There are some other heavy elements there, but iron is responsible for a lot of this. And it's going to absorb light, preferably in the blue part of the spectrum. So they have these lines in the spectrum where specific energies are being absorbed, so that light doesn't make it to us anymore. So we're losing the blue part of the spectrum. So if you have a lot of heavy elements in a star, you're losing the blue part but retaining the redder part. So it appears to be redder than an equivalent one that doesn't have many of those heavy elements there. So this is known as line blanketing, where you're just having all these absorption lines absorbing the energy in that part of the spectrum, specifically blue. And the other one is down to how opaque the star is. So the energy is generated in the core, and it then has to make its way out to the surface and then be emitted from the surface. But the more metals that you have in the star, it's going to absorb the energy on its way out. So as the energy moves from the interior to the exterior of the star, the metals absorb this energy. Now, for an equivalent red giant, that's going to make the red giant swell up more than one with less metals in, because it's absorbing that energy. And because it swells up more, it cools its surface temperature down, which then makes it redder. So part of the reason why red giants become red is because they swell up, their surface temperature cools down. But if you increase that even more by having more metals in there that absorb the energy and make it swell even more, then you're going to get a cooler temperature, which makes an equivalent one appear redder as well. But it's also worth noting that as stars age and they go through their evolutionary cycle, they will naturally redden as well. So thank you for watching, and if you enjoy, then check out some of the other videos.